Working in the summer can be quite hard due to the scorching temperatures, but I had to find a cool way to implement the health system into my game. And that didn't involve to fill the game with HUDs to display the current health to the player. So I went and looked for ideas, and found one that seemed to do for me. I'm Shinjingi, and this is Lost Temple. As always, when working on a new system, I like to create a Unity project just for that, so that I can actually focus on the system alone, without the worry of breaking something else. And as it always happens with tutorials, the shader wasn't working as expected. The part of the sprite that meets the border had no outline. I soon found out that it wasn't because the shader didn't work, but rather how the shader worked. The shader needs a transparent pixel to create the outline, so if the sprite reaches its borders, like in this animation, the outline won't render. To solve this issue, I just added to my sprite sheet an inner padding of 2 pixels to create a space between the sprite and its bounds. And by just updating the sprite sheet, I had the outline working just fine. The shader graph used to produce the outline might seem overwhelming at first sight, but as a lot of things in life, it is easier than you think. What actually happens is the sprite texture being copied and translated to the main directions. Then the difference from the two of them gets rendered with a white color, and that is the actual outline done for each of the main directions, and then combined into one. So after having the outline worked out, I decided to have a look at it into the scene. This is when I realized that since the game's palette consists of only 4 colors, the outline being one of them, I wouldn't be able to properly show the outline in every environment of the game, since there were areas where the color of the outline overlaps with elements in the scene. So I had to find a solution, and what came to mind was definitely not this, was the noise generator. When I was checking tutorials on how to create an outline shader, I came across a tutorial that was making use of the noise generator to animate the color of the outline. So I decided to add the noise generator to my shader graph, adding a few properties to be able to control the size, speed and color of the noise. The overlapping issue was now solved, and the barrier was visible under any circumstance. Thanks to the added properties, I was also able to control the values directly from the inspector, like the color of the noise, the speed of the noise, and its size. The only thing that remained to be done was actually to plug the shader to the health system in a way that will respond to the action in the game. The best way to do this was to create a second layer for the barrier animation, so that I could separate the sprite animation from the barrier one, and animate the two independently from each other. Since the second layer of the animator was set to override, I had to create an empty animation so that no values would have been overridden in the state, and the animator could always return to that animation when waiting for an action to occur. The 2 possible actions that the barrier can perform are the loose barrier and gain barrier. The loose barrier one is triggered when the player is hurt and both the attack and damage colliders are disabled in this state. Then, since I had problems setting the values directly on the shader, I had to create events and handle that part in the code. The gain barrier is very similar and gets triggered when the player collects an health item. The code for the barrier handles the state the barrier is in, depending on the current health, and also the type of animation to play depending on the event. When the player gets hurt, a life is removed, the loose barrier animation gets played, the outline noise speed diminishes to mirror the current health, and the player enters in the invincible state as long as the barrier flickers. In this state the player can't receive damage, nor he can do damage. This whole system is handled by an event that gets called when the player leaves the hurt state. The event itself is declared in the health script, and other scripts like the barrier one can subscribe to it so that when the event occurs, a method of your choice gets called, without the need to constantly check for it. Here's a brief showcase of what we have covered all together. When the player gets hit or collects an health item, the barrier flickers, and when the player remains with just one life, the barrier is removed, to tell the player that next hit will be a lethal one. Lastly, I want to say that I've created a Discord server where we can discuss suggestions to the game and everything else. I hope in this way we can start building a healthy community around this channel and have fun all together. So with this said and done, I'll see you in the next video and enjoy the journey.